Y'all turn to Romans 7, and let's go ahead and, well, before we start, I need to remind everybody it's good to pass this on. I don't ever say anything unless someone asks me to, but I always ask y'all to remember Tim and Lee in your prayers. Both of them preach prison ministries in addition to other stuff, but y'all just keep them in your prayers. You know, if nothing else, just keep them from just burning out. It's a task. It's a chore. You know, so keep them in your prayers that way. And then also always remember our two widows, Yanni over in the Netherlands, and then Dawn out in Phoenix. They definitely need your prayers. Keep them there. And then also Pam. Everybody knows Pam. She's been here several times from Texas. She's really having fits with her insulin, and it goes low. And I mean, she just passes out. You know, and she's driving and stuff. So y'all just, you know, she asked specifically. So y'all do that now. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Our Father, we come to you tonight just wanting to thank you and praise you and worship you. Lord, we want to praise you for everything you've done for us, everything you continue to do for us, and all those things you've promised. Father, we want to glorify our Savior, Jesus Christ, and we ask you to just feed us from your word and build us up and open our minds and strengthen us that we might glorify our Savior, that we might be a light unto the lost world, and that we might show all things through Christ to this nation. And people might see that he is the Savior and that he has done everything that needed to be done where sin is concerned. And also that we'd be able to be what we're supposed to be, and that's to be ambassadors, Lord. Let us keep that always in mind. In Christ Jesus' name, amen. All right, Romans chapter 7. I want to just deal with a passage here. And what I want to talk about tonight, I wrote down here the true nature of sin. And we're not going to be preaching against any sins. We're talking about sin. And always keep in mind there is a major difference in the Bible, especially in this book of Romans, between sin and sins. Sin is a noun. Sin is a thing. Sin is a principle. Sin is something that it's a power. Sins are things that we do as a result of sin. One is the disease, the other is the outbreaks of the disease. Now, I just want to start in verse 5. Let's read the passage first. Romans 7:5, Paul says, "For when we were in the flesh, the motions of sins, which were by the law, did work in our members to bring forth fruit unto death. But now we are delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin, but by the law. For I had not known lust, except the law had said, Thou shalt not covet. But sin, taken occasion by the commandment, wrought in me all manner of concupiscence. For without the law sin was dead. For I was alive without the law once, but when the commandment came, sin revived, and I died. And the commandment, which was ordained to life, I found to be unto death. For sin, taken occasion by the commandment, deceived me, and by it slew me. Wherefore the law is holy, and the commandment holy, and just, and good. Was then that which is good made death unto me? God forbid. But sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me by that which is good, that sin by the commandment might become exceeding sinful." Now that's the passage, and it's a real tough one, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of confusion about it, and I think just the language itself makes it hard. And there's a lot of different opinions on this thing, and all I want to do is I want to try and deal with a couple parts of it tonight. But what I'm going to do is
Excuse me, what is concupiscence?
Concupiscence is just overdriving desire, passion, lust, just out of control lust is what it is. It's an old word we don't use anymore. It's another reason why the passage is hard. The language is hard. I'm going to read it to y'all, and I'm not saying something's wrong with our Bible. I'm just going to read it. J.B. Phillips, one I use all the time. He's an old guy. He's been dead a long time from Britain. But anyway, he did put it in a more modern language. I'm just going to read it here and see if it helps us. He says, "While we were in the flesh, the law stimulated our sinful passions and so worked in our nature that we became productive for death. But now that we stand clear of the law, the claims which existed are dissolved by our death, and we are free to serve God not in the old obedience to the letter of the law, but in a new way in the Spirit. It now begins to look as if sin and the law were the same thing. Can this be a fact? Of course it can. But it must be admitted that I should never have had sin brought home to me but for the law. For example, I should never have felt guilty of the sin of coveting if I had not heard the law say, Thou shalt not covet. But the sin in me, finding in the commandment an opportunity to express itself, stimulated all my desires. For sin, in the absence of the law, has no life of its own. As long then as I was without the law, I was alive. But when the commandment arrived, sin sprang to life and I died. The commandment, which was meant to be a direction to life, I found was a sentence to death. The commandment gave sin its opportunity, and without my realizing what it was doing, sin killed me. It can scarcely be doubted that the law itself is holy, and the commandment is holy, fair, and good. Can it be that something that is intrinsically good could mean death to me? No. What happened was this. Sin, at the touch of the law, was forced to show itself as sin, and that meant death for me. The contact of the law showed the utterly sinful nature of sin. Now, let's just go back and let's talk about this, okay? To begin with, I want y'all to notice something. Paul is forced here to defend God's law. Okay, now what I mean by that is, go back in chapter 7 and look. Look how he says in verse 7. What shall we say then? After what he said here, is the law sin? In other words, after what he said, someone might get the impression that Paul's saying that the law is sinful. Now, why would someone say that? Because when you preach that all that comes by the works of the law is death, somebody'd say, well, then the law is not a good thing, is it? It's kind of like, let's say you had a disease of some kind and you went just to get a checkup and they run some normal test. They just take your blood pressure, for instance. You just sit down, you're going for a job interview and they take your blood pressure and they notice your blood pressure's off the roof. Off the roof high, right? And you realize, hey, I'm on the verge of having a stroke here. They get you in the hospital and say you was within a couple minutes of having a stroke, and they start digging around and they find out you've got a problem and they address the problem. Then what was that original blood pressure test? Would you sit back and say, boy, I hate that test, man. Look, that test drove my blood pressure through the roof. No. The test showed you the condition, didn't it? That's what he's saying about the law. The law's not a bad thing. The law's a good thing. But in showing us the pure horror of sin, he's going to show us tonight 3 things that sin can do with the law that will show you just how rotten sin is. Okay? So he's forced to do this. Now, the law can't save us and the law can't sanctify us. Okay? They never could. But the law is not sin. Okay? Let's look what he says first off. Look at Romans 7:12. Paul says, defending the law, he says, wherefore the law is holy, and the commandment holy and just and good. So is the law then good? You know, you just look at law, you actually could look at all of the ceremonial law, even Moses' law, all those dietary laws.
It's guidelines.
It's guidelines.
Yes.
Has God ever told man to do something in his law that's bad for man? Y'all look at just the law. Okay, a Jew couldn't eat pork. Well, what do we find out today? You'd be better off if you didn't eat pork, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
How about a Jew couldn't eat catfish or crabs or oysters? Well, you tell you what, I hate to say this, but we would be better off if we didn't eat them. They're bottom feeders, aren't they? You find out they got a lot of contamination in them and all. There's lots of things that the law showed, and I mean, everything about the law is good. It's holy. But what is sin like? Sin is something that is so powerful. It's so strong that sin can take God's holy law and even make it look like it's sin. Now that's a strong thing that can do that, okay? So he says in verse 12, the law is holy, the commandment holy and just and good. Now look at verse 14. We know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. So then here's some things that the law is. The law, and this is God's law now, is holy, just, good, spiritual. Well, if the law, Paul says, is spiritual, then who's the only one that can actually use it? The spiritual man. So what's the only thing that the law can do to the natural man? Kill him. It slays you and shows you I can't do it. That's all the law can do for the natural man. Look at verse 22. Paul says, I delight in the law of God after the inward man. Now is Paul saying this after he was saved? He said the law was Paul's delight. Well, does that sound like something that's bad? No, he said he delighted inward after the inward man. Look at verse 25. I thank God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then with the mind I myself serve the law of God, but with the flesh the law of sin. So Paul had arrived at a conclusion. Could he keep the law in his flesh? No. What's the only thing the law can do to the flesh? Kill it. Now that leads someone to say, well, that law is a bad thing, and if it kills, is it? No, the flesh needs killing, doesn't it? All right, now let's just take all of this and wind it up and start looking at it. We see the true nature of sin if we consider what it does with God's holy law. Okay? You know, any of y'all like to watch lawyer movies, lawyer shows? I do. I like a lawyer show. I don't know why. Courtroom stuff, I enjoy that. I used to like Perry Mason could do it, but Matlock did it more. I guess maybe I watched Matlock more recently.
Seen the bull.
The bull?
That's good.
It's good? All right. Matlock would get a guy on the stand. Now, anybody that gets on that witness stand has practiced, hadn't they? And they've been coached, and they know how to act and and they get up there and they put on their act, don't they? But y'all remember how Matlock could do? Matlock could toy around with him and weasel around with him until he finally brought out the real personality. Remember how he would do it all the time? And everybody in Matlock confessed on the stand. They all admitted they were murder on the stand. That never happens, but Matlock always got them to do it. But what happened was, you would see him in his true nature. I'm trying to think, I had an aunt, I told y'all growing up, we were all terrified of her, and years later I saw her and she was so nice and sweet and kind, and I thought, who is she? She said, I'm just an old lady trying to get to heaven. And I thought, boy, this is strange, you know. But it took about 15 minutes and somebody got her mad, and I thought, oh, there she is. Okay, there's my aunt, right? See, the true her come out, didn't it? Well, how does sin as a noun now, as a power, as a principle, how does sin present itself? Folks, it's the most desirable of things. Y'all think about the things that our flesh desires and wants. Do they look horrible? No. They look like it's going to be good, it's going to satisfy me. Matter of fact, we're told that Satan and his ministers are able to present themselves as angels of light, aren't they? Well, if you want to see sin in its true nature, you know, you really want to see someone in their true nature, watch how they deal in certain situations, right? I'll tell y'all one of the times I have a lot of interaction with people at funerals, right? And one of the things you find out at a funeral is, you find out about a family at a funeral. Y'all ever notice that? Boy, the worst comes out in people at funerals. You'll have families, I mean, it's just horrible stuff comes out. And what you find out is you think, boy, I thought this was a nice family. Man, these people are just, they're fighting and arguing. I mean, before they ain't even got the person in the ground and they're already trying to divvy up their stuff. And it's just, it brings out the worst in people, doesn't it? Well, you want to bring sin out and see it in its true light? Look at what sin does with God's holy law. Now, Paul said the law is holy, just, good, spiritual, and it's his delight. But what had he been brought to a position here? He's got to defend it, because what does sin do? Sin can actually make the law appear bad, can't it? Now, that's powerful when you can make God's holy law seem like a bad thing. Right? Now, let's go back and let's deal with all of this. What I want to do, I want to use two verses tonight to focus on it. I'm going to put the last one first, verse 13 and verse 8. Okay? Now, let's deal with verse 13 first. Let's deal with our terms. Verse 13 says, was then that which is good made death unto me? In other words, did the law kill me? Now, isn't that what people say? The law kills. Well, does the law kill? No. Sin kills. The law doesn't kill, but people say it does, don't they? That's like saying that judge killed me. No. The judge found you guilty and you died because of the crime, right? Well, all the law does is point out the sin. So he says, was then that which is good made death unto me? God forbid. Of course the law didn't kill, he says, but sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me by that which is good, that sin by the commandment might become exceeding sinful. Now let's deal with the terms first. Y'all see that appear? That it might appear sin? He's telling us here the whole purpose of this passage. Why has sin been allowed to be, or why has sin been allowed to manipulate God's law and make God's holy law look the way it does? God said here that it might appear sin. In other words, God has let this go on in order that sin's true nature might appear. And what's the true horror of sin? It can make God's law look sinful. Now let me show you what I mean. Y'all see the word appear there? Appear means brought forth into light, to show itself in true light, to expose itself, to bring forth to accuse. The word they use it a lot of times, it's a farming term. You know, you plant seed and you're unsure what the seed was. And all of a sudden it starts to come forth, and as it comes forth, what does it do? It gets bigger and grows and blossoms and it puts on fruit, and then you're sure what you've got. It's appearing in its true nature, isn't it? So he says sin, in order to appear in its true nature, has done this. In other words, I'd say it this way. God allows his law to be cast upon by sin, to lure sin out of its hiding place and to show itself in its true horror. Y'all know sin seems good, doesn't it? I mean, what seems better? You know, ain't nothing seems better. You know, I used this example a while back, and I don't want anybody to get mad at me, but I told y'all I used to love to have a frozen margarita. Boy, it ain't nothing better than that hot summer day, that cold, frozen, it's cold, you throw it, everything about it, it's sour, it's just good. And I got to wondering, is this something I ought to be doing? And y'all know what that margarita became to me one night? One little small margarita. I went to bed saying, Lord, do I need to leave this alone? And I woke up in the middle of the night sick as a dog, puking my guts up. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't anything. The margarita just turned my stomach. Well, it wasn't the margarita that did it. It was the Lord showing me. So what would be the best thing for me to do? That was my answer, just leave it alone. See, that thing seemed to be good, didn't it? I told y'all about one night I tried to talk to the waitress. She said something, I went to talk to her about the Lord, and you know what she did? She looked straight at that margarita. She stared right at me and looked at that margarita, and she was right. Well, I got no business. What's the best thing to do? Be done with it. Leave it alone. Or you could pick anything like that. Sometimes food seems like it's just, hey, we all go to a restaurant and boy, you look on the menu, and for Valentine's Day, me and Lexi went to eat. And we went to Olive Garden, be honest with you, specifically for the breadsticks and the salad. Now we got a meal, but them breadsticks, boy, are good, aren't they, in that salad? You know, all the way over there I was thinking this is going to be the best thing, these breadsticks and this salad. Y'all know what seemed like it was going to be a wonderful thing turned out to be a horrible thing that night? I laid down in the bed. Hey, me and Lexi go to bed about 8:30 or 9 o'clock. I laid down and here come the breadsticks and the salad right up here. Well, it seemed like it was going to be good, but what happened? It showed itself in its true light. And that's what sin always does. But anyway, the next term, exceeding sinful. So we've got appear, which means to show in true light. And then we've got exceeding sinful. Now, this is really kind of fascinating. You know, if you're going to define a word, don't they tell you not to use the word? If you're going to define a word, you're not supposed to use that word in the definition, are you? But Paul did. Paul said the definition of sin, what's sin really like? What's sin's true nature? It's exceeding sinful. Think about it. He couldn't figure it. There isn't another word. There is no word horrible enough to describe sin. Sin is not just some negative. We're going to get to this, but sin is not just a negative like, well, I fell short. Sin is a positive power. It dwells in each one of us, and it can do things. It drives. It's a horrible thing. Yeah. So Paul said the only way I can describe sin is sinful. Just exceeding sinful. It's wretched. It's horrible. So, exceeding sinful. All right, verse 8 then. Let's go back and deal with the terms in verse 8. First thing I want y'all to know is he says sin. He doesn't say sins, does he? So when he says sin, exceeding sinful means sin is sinful. And again, he says that because there's no other way to put it. But when we deal with sin over here, it's a noun, it's a power, and it's a principle. Okay? So we've got sin. And again, sin is not just a negative. Sin is a powerful and a mighty positive force. Now, man teaches that sin means to miss the mark. Haven't we all heard that one? And yeah, the definition of sins, the root is to miss the mark. But think what that means. To miss the mark. That's just a negative, isn't it? In other words, I didn't quite come up to par here. I fell a little short. That's not what sin means. It doesn't mean that at all. Okay? See, man believes that sin is like an absence of something. I didn't quite reach perfection. They think, hadn't y'all ever heard someone teach that there's a little good in all people? You just need to educate them and bring them out. We just need a little refining. Not so. What's our problem? Have we missed the mark a little bit here and there? Nope. We're born with something in us, a power and a principle in us, and it's got to be eradicated. Can we just get rid of it? What's got to happen to sin? It's got to die. It's got to be killed, okay? So, sin there, man for again says it's just absence of perfection. So he says, well, we just need, a little education and a little refinement and we'll rise above it. No, it won't happen. We've got more education today than we've ever had. Look around. Do we look like we're less sinful? No. It's just sin's wreaking havoc everywhere. All right? Sin, according to the Bible, is a master and an emperor. Let me show you what I mean. Go back to chapter 5. Romans 5:21 says that as sin hath reigned unto death. So then can sin reign? Well, what does that make it? What does reign mean? Rule, folks. It's powerful. It reigns, okay? Hey, tell you what, go over to chapter 6 and look how he uses it. Look in verse 12. Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, that you should obey it in the lusts. He used slave language in this term. Sin not only reigns, it's a master. Folks, that's something powerful, isn't it? Look in verse 14. Sin shall not have dominion over you, for you're not under the law, but under grace. So then sin has dominion. Well, who does sin have dominion over? Lost people. It rules and reigns over lost people. If something's got dominion over you, can you overcome it? No, it's impossible. So you tell a lost man to straighten up, he's just missed the mark. Try a little harder and you'll be okay. Are you telling him the truth? He hasn't just missed the mark. He's been born under the reign of the wrong king. So what's got to happen to him? He's got to be born again under the reign of the right king. So again, these are terms. Look at verse 16. He says, know ye not that to whom you yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom you obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness. Then sin's something that can demand obedience, isn't it? Look in verse 17. God be thanked that you were the servants or slaves of sin, but you have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered you. So then we learn right away sin is powerful, isn't it? Okay, so there's one thing. Now, the next word I want to deal with, go back over there to chapter 7, verse 8 again. He says, but sin, this powerful principle, this master, this emperor, taking occasion by the commandment, wrought in me all manner of concupiscence. For without the law, sin was dead. Now the next word we got is wrought. What does wrought mean? It's a form of a word work. Everybody's seen wrought iron, hadn't you? I've always all my life thought it was wrought iron. I got a wrought iron fence. No, it ain't what it is. It's wrought iron. How, you know why they call it wrought? How do they do it? They heat it up and they beat it. It's beat. In the old days, I don't know how they do it today. I would say cut it with a CNC machine today, I don't know. But to rot is to work something out, to hammer it out, to beat it out, is to work on it. Now this particular word here, wrought, it means to work powerfully and successfully. It's not just to beat on something or anything, it's to do it, to work with power and achieve your goal. Okay? Now, the next one we need to do. If sin, by the way, works and it rots, is it powerful? Folks, picture sin for a moment, being the man beating out the rod iron. Sin, that principle works. It does something. Now, this next one is fascinating to me. Taking occasion. I don't know how to spell occasion. Is it one C or two?
Two.
Two. Okay, taking occasion. Now, this means, well, it's two words, but the root word is from a word that means a starting point. Okay, literally it means a place to begin. Now, it's a military term in its most basic use, and what it means is, it's like the military has a base of operations from which to launch an attack. You remember in World War II, we were always trying to get an island out there in the Pacific. We would fight a war. They'd battle over an island that was nothing but just rock. And you'd say, well, why do they want to do that? Because they need it for an airfield. In other words, they need a starting point to launch their attack, don't they? Well, that's what this word means. It's a starting point from which to launch the attack. But then there's another way of looking at it that I find the most fascinating of all. All right, if we read it this way, what it means is, Paul's saying, sin, making use of the commandment as a base of operations. Okay, so sin uses the commandment and it uses it like a starting point at which to launch an attack. Now, how can sin take God's holy law and use that as a point to start an attack? Does this make any sense? It's kind of confusing, isn't it? For me, you look at it and say, well, how can this be? Y'all just bear with me. This word also is the same word they use for a fulcrum. Now, do y'all know what a fulcrum is? A fulcrum it's a pivot point. I used to have a stonemason that did a lot of stone work for me. He was a real stonemason, not these guys around here that learned it here. This guy was from upper state New York, and he was a master stonemason. I mean, he was incredible. He had these big old long rods, just these iron rods. He could move just about any size rock. If I couldn't get the backhoe to it, we were building big waterfalls all the time. Some of these rocks would weigh, at times they would weigh up 6,000 to 7,000 pounds. Huge boulders that we would build with. I would get it close, but we would want to twist it or turn it to show a certain face on it. Or you always had to have it angled towards the pool so the water didn't go backwards, it went forward in the waterfall. Well, you know what that man could do? He could move that boulder. You say, but how? He'd take those rods. And you say, there ain't no way that man can pick up a 6,000. He didn't try to pick up a 6,000 pound. He would take another small rock, a little rock about like this. It's called a fulcrum. He would put that little leverage. He would put that little rock down, and he would put his bar over the top of that rock, and on the end of that bar, it didn't even take much. He would just do that with it. And that would be his pivot point. He could use that fulcrum to move that rock anywhere he wanted. And that's exactly what we're going to see here about sin. Look, it's like you could say this. Sin, using the commandment as a fulcrum, was able to move its load and bring about its desired effect or result. In other words, what Paul says here, remember he said he had not known sin except the law had said, he had not known lust except the law said, thou shalt not covet. All right, that's the 10th commandment. Thou shalt not covet. Now that has nothing to do with your outward actions, does it? It has to do with your inward desire. In other words, what Paul found out, Paul thought he was fine once. He was living under the law, blameless as a Pharisee, everything was fine. But he got saved, and the Lord began to show him the truth of that law, didn't he? And what did he find out? He found out it ain't just the act that's the problem, it's the thought of the act. He thought out just the desire to do something like this is sin, isn't it? Well, what did that do to him? He said, man, it slew me. He thought he was a real good, holy person, and what did the law do? The law slew him. Now, it was that 10th commandment, he said, that really got him. So let me read it this way. Paul says, sin, that powerful force, that master, got on the end of a rod and used the law, the 10th commandment, like a fulcrum to bring about every evil desire in me. Now that's exactly what he means. Now I want y'all to just picture it here. See if I can draw something. We've got sin. Let's use sin like a man, okay? And he's got his rod under there, and he's got him a rock here. And this rock is his fulcrum, and that's the law. And then he's got his load, okay? And the load, in many cases, will be us. Now, sin desires to get us to commit sins, doesn't it? Yeah. The driving force, the disease of sin in us brings about all these desires, right? Now, how does sin get us to do this? Paul said, this is how horrible sin is. Sin took the holy and just commandment, thou shalt not covet, and got me to covet. Now, is that powerful? How did it do it? How can sin be this powerful? How can sin take God's holy law and get sin out of it? But it can. Let me show you what I mean. The true horror of sin is that it uses God's law for its own purposes. Now imagine that. God's holy law. When God gave the law on Mount Sinai, it shook, it thundered. It's a holy, righteous, perfect thing, isn't it? And yet sin is so powerful, sin can manipulate God's law. Now let's go back and we're just going to do this in 3 points. Here are 3 things that the law does according to Paul. Number 1, it arouses rebellion at the receiving of the commandment. Okay, I'll show you what I mean. Number 1 is sin arouses rebellion. As soon as you tell someone, command them, you issue a prohibition, what does it bring about in a sinner? Come on, if I got a sin in here right now and said, don't touch that, what's she going to want to do?
Touch it.
Why? Sin. It's a sin nature. Folks, look, we all have this in us. You know, Paul said the carnal mind is not subject to the law of God. Neither indeed can it be. Can you get the carnal mind, the natural mind, to subject itself to God's law? It's impossible. You might try for a little while out of fear. Y'all know good and well our nature as sinners is such. You tell me, don't you dare do that, and what's my first thought? Who you think you are? Isn't it? Huh?
The religious system today is causing people to try to be saved by works. And people are trying that. They just can't do it, and they don't want to reveal why they can't.
Yeah.
But they're never taught about it.
Never taught what sin is.
Yeah.
See, they're taught that basically they've just got to reform themselves and do better, and God will accept them.
Yeah.
How are you going to do better when the very problem you've got can take the thing that you're trying to do better by and use it against you?
Yeah.
It'd be like if the doctor said, well, you know, I'm going to have to tell you what, you got this blood disease, and unless you start walking, okay, you need to start walking 10 miles a day to get your circulation going, or you're going to lose your legs. Matter of fact, you've already got blood disease. I'm going to amputate your legs. Wait a minute. You telling me I need to walk 10 miles a day for my disease, and you telling me you're about to cut my legs off? You see how hopeless that is?
Yeah.
Hey, what can you do? Well, that's what it is to tell a man. He's got to straighten up and serve God by the law to be saved or to be sanctified.
Yeah.
Now, let me show you what I mean here. Our spirit of rebellion asserts itself as soon as any law enters, doesn't it? Is that not a result of sin? Y'all know how we are. I'm not going to bow. Y'all know good and well that's how we are. Hey, I'll tell y'all, I don't ever remember from the time I got, I don't know, 25, just wearing a seatbelt. I had no problem wearing a seatbelt till they told me you got to wear a seatbelt. And I just didn't like it. Well, if I want to kill myself in a wreck, that's my business. Who are you to tell me? No, that's stupid, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's causing that?
flesh.
It's the flesh. Folks, you tell a sinner not to do. Look, the very prohibition, as soon as prohibition enters, it causes rebellion, doesn't it? Now that's one of the attributes of sin. Folks, that's a powerful thing. How can I ever straighten up and fly right when one of the attributes of sin is, as soon as you tell me to straighten up and fly right, I don't want to straighten up and fly right? I mean, that's a hard thing to overcome, isn't it? Now that you only find this out, you only see sin, you only lure sin out of the dark to see it in its true light when you look at how it works with the law. In other words, we all think we know something about sin. But the truth is, God has allowed sin to manipulate His law against man in order that man can see the true nature of sin. Sin is a horrible thing. Sin has got every human being in such a condition that they are utterly hopeless. What can you do? Seriously, what can you do about your sin? Folks, we all look, and I'm not telling you we deserve a free pass. We don't, because one of the things our sin does is it produces that desire in us. You say, well, I didn't ask to be born a sinner. No, but you sure have sinned without asking, haven't we? We've all sinned wantingly, haven't we? So this is one of the things it can do. Now, one more time, any prohibition at all produces outrage in us. See, when it does, the law then becomes a fulcrum to move the sinner to sin. Okay? As soon as you issue a command, don't do this or do this, sin is able to take that command like a fulcrum, and guess what it can do? It can move us to rebellion. Sin can take that command and just move you right over to rebellion. Hey, God said, don't you do this. Well, He ain't going to tell me. That's sin. Okay, that's one of the things it can do. Another thing about this is it produces lawlessness, right? Now, let me show y'all what I mean. Don't we all like an outlaw? Let's be honest, we do. We like an outlaw, don't we? I like to watch things about Billy the Kid or Jesse James and them. Why? They were beating the system. They were against the man. They were anti-establishment, right? I watched a documentary one time on this wrestler. This guy's a wrestler, and y'all all heard of he's the bald guy, Stone Cold, wrestling guy, Stone Cold. He wrestled. He was a good wrestler, they said, but he tried all kind of stuff and nothing ever worked. He never got popular. He was good. He was muscular. He could do everything, but he just never got over. And all of a sudden he sat down and he decided, I've got to go at this a different way. And he thought, just playing a bad guy won't work and being the good guy, because in wrestling you got the good guys and the bad guys. He said, what I've got to do is I've got to somehow be a bad guy that looks like the good guy. In other words, he said, people like an outlaw. People like somebody that's anti-establishment. So he come on there and he started acting like that. He said the boss come out, old Vince McMahon come out, and he gave him the finger and threw stuff at him, and the people just went crazy. Why? He's rebelling against the boss. See, we like that.
Yeah.
Sin in us likes that, doesn't it? Okay, we all watch a show. Who's your favorite characters on the show? The law-abiding ones? No, we like the ones that fly by their own set of rules, don't we? We like the ones that go against the grain. It's because sin in us leaves us where literally we do not like having anyone have control over us. And we think we're free when we rebel against everything, and what we don't realize is what we're actually is not free. We're under the dominion of sin. He's got us thinking we're free, and the whole time, are we? No, you're not free. If you think you're free, let me see you get out from under sin. You're not free, are you? All right, now, the second thing sin can do. Sin also causes man to accuse God of harshness or unreasonableness, because the law is given to even govern our minds, isn't it? Look, sin takes God's holy law, and as a fulcrum, it gets us to accuse God. Now what I mean is this. Does the 10 Commandments govern our thoughts? 10th commandment says, thou shalt not lust, doesn't it? And I don't mean just lusting after women. That's part of it. It means you shalt not desire. You shouldn't just greed, ate up, wanting this, wanting that, looking, hey, if I want this, or look on this one. You say, well, I never killed him. No, but you thought about it. See, it tells us that the thoughts are the problem too, aren't they? And you know what a man says about that? Well, that's going too far. And it's one thing to tell me I've got to do this or not do this, but now you're going to tell me how I got to think? I mean, come on, He's going too far there. I mean, basically we find the whole prospect of, my thoughts being sinful is just too much. Hadn't you ever met someone that says, well, what's the point? I mean, if you ever thought it, you've done it. And when you first learn under the law that whosoever keeps the whole law and yet offends in one point is guilty of all. Well, what's one of the first things sin will tell you? Well, you're already guilty, what's it matter? Or when you find out that thou shalt not commit adultery also means you don't even look on a woman with lust, or you're guilty. You thought, well, I'm already guilty, I might as well do it. You see what sin can do? And what's sin using to produce those thoughts? The law. Folks, sin uses God's law and uses it against us to move us this way. And He moves us just the way He wants us to go. Okay? Now, another thing it does is sin will get us to accuse God of unreasonableness and to just give up. I mean, hadn't you ever known anybody say, well, I mean, what's the point here? What's the use? I mean, it's impossible. I can't govern all my thoughts and get them straightened out. What's the use? I just give up and do it anyway. You see what sin's done? Yep. That's a horrible thing, isn't it? Yes, it is. Hey, sin takes God's holy commandment that says, thou shalt not lust, and says, well, there you go. You can't possibly get out of this. When God's an ogre, just give up and do it anyway. You've already failed. Yeah. Now you're going to defeat an enemy that's that smart and powerful. It's impossible, isn't it? But there's a third one I want to deal with here. And this is probably the worst one of all. Sin takes the command and it insinuates ideas into our mind that might not have been there before. Now it does, alright? Sin is able to take the law and to introduce desires. Show you what I mean. Take a little kid. If I had a little kid in here and I said, I'm going to put this book over here. Don't y'all touch this book. I've just introduced a command, haven't I? Did that kid notice that book before I said it? But what did the command do? It put the thought in there, didn't it? And what begins to happen from that point? Our sin nature, curiosity, we're like a cat. Look, what is it about that book? Who's he think he is telling me not to touch? Must be something special about it, and on and on. And the next thing you know, we got all these thoughts wrong that never would have been there if it wasn't for the command, would it? Sin can do that. Now, y'all see how horrible it is? Hey, look, I want y'all to see why Paul said all he could say about sin is that it's exceeding sinful. There ain't a worse word in the English language. Sin is everything that is opposed to God. And this is what entered into the human race by one act. Satan understood fully well what he was doing. Folks, he wasn't introducing, he wasn't prompting man to do something. He was introducing a disease. It's kind of like I've heard them talking about this, whatever this virus is, and they claim now that they think China started it. Y'all seen this they're talking about? They think it started in this chemical lab or whatever. The whole idea is somehow, somewhere, it got started, didn't it? How did it start? It was introduced into one person. Adam. Adam is where sin was introduced. And what did it do? Look at the results.
We're a product of it.
Yeah, and we're a product of it. And folks, the harder you fight against it, the worse it is.
And Satan knows that too well.
He does. Folks, I mean, seriously, we are fighting against something that you and I couldn't possibly understand or overcome. I mean, what hope is there? There's only one hope. Jesus Christ died to pay for sin. Jesus Christ has the power over sin and death. Jesus Christ says to the person that believes on Him, greater is He that's in you than he that's in the world. What did Paul say? After the command slew him, what did he say years later? He said, I delight after the law. Why? He quit kicking against it. He quit fighting, he quit trying to get saved by it. He quit trying to be sanctified by it. He just said, hey, these are God's holy commands. These are just and good and right. So now, let's talk about this third one, though. Sin takes the command, and it insinuates ideas into my mind that hadn't been there. Right? Thus, sin uses the command as a fulcrum to kindle my lust and to drive me to every evil thought that I didn't even know I wanted. Sin is able to take that command. The command enters in, don't do this or do this. And sin takes that and like a fulcrum launches that idea into my mind. And once the idea, James said, the idea comes, and then what happens? We begin to think about it. We begin to cater it and kick it around and enjoy it. And the next thing you know, we're lusting after it, wanting it, and then your body's doing it. And that's sin on the end of that bar moving us that way. And how did it all start? With a command not to do it. Let's see if I can give a practical example here. Sex education, right? Sex education in school. We've all heard this one. I think it started sometime around when I was in school, around then or somewhere. I remember in 7th grade, they gave us these books, and I tell y'all that's the only school book I ever looked at. Seriously. Why? What did it do?
It appealed to you.
Folks, it introduced all kind of ideas.
Yes.
Hey, you know what they say? They say that man is basically good, and the thing is that the way you overcome these desires is to educate them about it. Well, has it worked?
No.
Folks, it don't educate, it introduces curiosity.
Yeah.
Hey, look, you say something and the idea pops in there. I heard an old preacher say one time that he had read a book, and he said it had been the bane of his existence. This was a wonderful old preacher. He said he read a book on sexual problems, trying to get knowledge to help someone in his church. And he said what he really did was introduce things to him that he didn't even know were out there. He said he got to look and said, how in the world? I had no idea. And he said they seemed shocking and horrible to him. And he said every so often they kept popping back into his mind. Don't we know something about that?
Yeah.
I mean, we do, don't we? You hear someone say, so-and-so did such, you said they did what? What in the world would they do that for? And then you say, well, I don't even get that. How is this? And you're discussing it, talking about it. Next thing you know, you're driving thinking, I wonder why they did, what is it? It's like drugs. Is drug education working?
Oh, yeah.
Folks, they get on TV and say, hey, we've got this new drug now. We want to warn you kids about it. This new drug is horrible. It's bad. It's the most powerful thing. This is the most dangerous drug out there. And what does it do? It makes it the most popular. You see, it's the same with the command. Sin's able to take God's commands and make us want to do this. I mean, think about Eve. What happened with Eve? God said, don't eat from that tree. And what did Satan do? He come over there with his fulcrum, he set it down, and he started moving her, didn't he? He said, yeah, God knows if you eat from that tree, you're going to be like God. You're going to be wise. He won't be able to hold you down any longer. He won't be able to keep you under his thumb. In fact, he knows you'll be like him. In fact, he knows you can be, it doesn't matter if you want to say it's be like God or the gods, either way. You can be like us angels or you can be like God. Either way, the idea was introduced. If that tree had not been singled out, would that have happened? They probably wouldn't have got around to eating it, would they?
Put that desire in.
He put the desire in us. Now, this is what sin can do. All right? I'll show you just a couple examples. Go back to Genesis 6. In Genesis 6, this is the problem. This is the result of sin. In verse 5, God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now, what produced that? Sin. Now, how does sin do this? It uses these 3 points we're talking about. Let's say it this way. Paul said, go back to Romans 7 and let's read it again and see if we can make sense of what he's saying. Okay? Basically, what Paul's telling us here about this third point is that sin can use the command to fill our minds with thoughts and drive me to despair or to act on the thing. And either way, it's bad. If it drives you to despair over the thought, you're defeated. If it drives you to give up and just do the thing, you're defeated. Either way, you're defeated, aren't you? Okay, now, let me show you what I mean. Let's go back to verse 5. Paul said, for when we were in the flesh, before we were saved, the emotions of sins which were by the law. What excited the emotion of sin? Law. Look, I'm sitting here just as happy as can be. Everything's fine. And I'm just standing there. To give you an example, I'm looking there in the kitchen. Lexi was working on a quilt. I walked in, I looked at her working on this quilt, and I looked over there and I saw a tissue box covered up, done up nice like Valentine's, and I looked and there's some candy. And I said, oh, that would be good. And then I got the command, don't eat that. Now what does that do?
It makes you want it more.
Folks, I looked at it. When I looked, it ain't even candy that I like. It's not a candy, it's not, is it? It's that Mike or whatever it's called? Yeah, Ikes, I don't like them. But y'all know what that command does? I went out to the shop. I was building something for Miss Ruth and went out there to work on it for a minute, sitting out there, and I couldn't quit thinking about them things. Folks, I didn't even know. You see that's what it does. And I know we say, well, that's a silly example, but that's what sin can do. It's because of the nature we have. We don't want to be told what to do. We do not like to be regulated. We have all these thoughts, and as more thoughts enter in, what happens? We get this hopeless despair and say, well, what's the use? Just give in. And that's what sin can do. It's a horrible thing. All right, now, Paul says, verse 5, for when we were in the flesh, the motions of sins which were by the law did work in our members to bring forth fruit unto death. In other words, did you ever do any work that produced life before you were saved? No, all them things you tried to do under the law just produced failure and death, didn't it? He said, but now, since we've been saved, we are delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. In other words, the law as a master has died, hasn't it? Do you and I have to let the law move us? Do we have to let sin manipulate us? We don't have to, do we? We've been set free. Have we been given the power to rise above that? We have. So he says, verse 7. What shall we say then? Since the law seemed to only bring death, is the law sin? God forbid. He said, I had not known sin, but by the law. He said, the law's not bad. I would have never known what a sinner I was if it wasn't for the law. In other words, I never would have knew I had the disease without the test, so the test is not a bad thing. He said, I had not known lust, except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. Would Paul have known that it was wrong to have these desires if the law had said, thou shalt not desire? If the 10th commandment wasn't there, then desire would be okay, wouldn't it? And we wouldn't understand the true nature of sin. See, we would think, well, I've never killed anyone, but what does the law say? You thought about it? See, the law does this. So he says this is a good thing. He says, verse 8, but sin, taking occasion by the commandment, using the commandment like a fulcrum, wrought in me all manner of concupiscence. What Paul's saying is, I thought I was real good. And one day I started looking at that 10th commandment in honesty and sincerity, and I said, wait a minute, is that telling me to even desire these things is bad? It's one thing to act on it, but isn't this saying that just having the desire is bad? And that is what it says, isn't it? And that struck him. And then what happened? A flood of desires come running into him. That's what sin can do. It overwhelmed him. So then what began to happen? Let's read on. Verse 9. I was alive without the law once, before he properly understood it. He thought he was great, living well. He said, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died. Sin came back to life. He thought sin had been eradicated in his life, and what happened? The law showed it in its true. The law lured it out of the dark and showed it in Paul in its true nature. Paul could see the sin in him in its true light because of that 10th commandment. So he says, verse 10, the commandment which was ordained to life, I found to be unto death. He found out, hey, this is killing me. All he did, he said, look, I'm a cesspool of wicked thoughts. This law tells me that to think evil things is bad, and I started off thinking, well, I ain't got that many evil thoughts, and it's gone downhill since. Since I started monitoring my thoughts, I realized I got a problem. One time, Lexi downloaded this diet app for me. All you do, you scan what you eat. Y'all ever seen this thing? You just scan the barcodes, and it keep up with it for you, won't it? You think you're doing pretty good. Think, well, I ain't eating that bad. Scan everything you put in your mouth. You do it, and you know what you'll find out? Holy cow, that many calories?
Yeah.
You don't think about that teaspoon of sugar in your coffee. I didn't think about a teaspoon of honey. I mean, that's for my allergies. That don't count, right?
I desire to go there.
Yeah.
You don't read that fine print.
You don't.
But I need it. I want it.
You have a sandwich, you say, well, 2 pieces of bread and you know, and some meat. What about the mayo?
Cheese.
The cheese, the tomato?
Yeah.
And when you start doing this all day, say, wait a minute, she had gum. I said, hold on a second. Gum, wait. She said, well, that's 10 calories a piece. You chewed 4 pieces of gum. I'm like, what? Just time out here. But I want y'all to see what I'm saying now. Folks, that's what happened with Paul. See, Paul really thought he was a good law-abiding citizen, and Jesus Christ began to reveal that law to him, and that 10th command pricked him. And he said, wait a minute, desire? So he started thinking on his desires, and what did he find out? It was only evil continually. Now that's what the law can do. Now he says in verse 12, wherefore the law is holy, the commandment holy and just and good. Now how can he say that if it killed him? Because we need to be killed. We need slaying, don't we? And folks, that's why God lets sin manipulate His law that way. It's like God is doing like Perry Mason or Matlock. He's asking questions and giving that witness real freedom to express himself and giving him a full range to testify for what? He's luring him out of the shadows to show you what he's really like. You want to know why Paul said it's the exceeding sinfulness of sin? Because there's nothing like it in the world. There's only one attribute more powerful than sin in this world. And it's the attributes of God and His love. Is the love of God a stronger motivator than the power of sin? Yeah. And nobody in here is talking about becoming sinless. What we're doing is we're looking at sin in its true nature. Remember what it does, okay? It says, sin brings out this in us. My nature says I'm not going to bow. It's quick to say, judge God and say He's unreasonable. And now if I'm already thinking about it, I'm already guilty, so what's it matter? And sin uses these things. Now the power of sin is that it can use God's holy law to produce these results. The nature and the emotion of sin is only aggravated by the law. And as it comes out of its hiding place to respond, it's only then that me and you can see it in its true light. You know, all afternoon I've been right on the cusp of an analogy and I can't come up with it. In my mind I'm picturing all, and they keep coming in my head, and maybe y'all would think of one, but it's like in a movie somebody's wanting to slay a dragon or something, but they got to get it to come out of its hiding place, don't they? Well, what do we have to do? Folks, if you're ever going to be saved, you're going to have to come to a conclusion what this sin is. Now, people just assume they're saved, or they take a head fake to say, I'm saved. You know, well, I believe the facts. Yeah, I trust Jesus. I believe what you're saying here. But have you ever seen yourself like Paul's talking about here? My every imagination is only evil continually. Have y'all ever found out about yourself? It's the truth. You start examining your thoughts, and I'll tell you what you'll find. Your chief thought in almost everything that you do, your chief thought will be self.
Troy,
Mm-hmm.
you can't see that before you. If you're not saved, you can't see it in that depth.
You can't. Look, the carnal mind cannot receive the things that we cannot receive. It can't be subject to it. So all the carnal mind can do is react in these ways. The carnal mind sells exactly buys what sin's selling every time. We jump in, y'all know we do. Somebody said, well, the best thing for you to do is just keep your mouth closed. Well, that'd be the best thing to do, but here I go. And we're in on it, aren't we? And this is what sin knows about us. It's kind of like this. It's like sin knows itself better than we do. Satan knows exactly the attributes of sin, so you're already fighting one that has a better understanding than you, and he knows just what button to push, doesn't he? Does he know our personalities? Folks, he knows exactly how to get you and I into the situations and we'll just go plowing down that road. He does not want you to see sin in its true light. So what did God do? He put that command out there. His holy law, and what does it do? It shows you the true nature of sin by looking at how the sin is able to handle God's law. Only something as horrible and as rotten as sin could take something that's given for our good and use it unholy. Nothing else could do this. It's impossible. Okay? All right, any questions on that? Okay, well, thank y'all very much.